Hi, my name's Alex Weber and I'm the bass player for Exist. We're going to be talking about my gear today. So due to venue constraints, we can't actually show you what my full stage setup is, but with the basses, both of them are 5-string basses that I've built myself. This was actually the first one that I built that I finished in 2015, and is still pretty much my main bass. You know, I've built maybe 7 or 8 after this one, but there's something about this one that's always felt kind of special to me. Could be just because it's the first one I built. But it's a 5-string single cut with a swamp ash body, Wenge and mahogany 5-piece neck with a pretty sick Cocobolo top. And the electronics are Nordstrom Fat Stacks, which now I've put in pretty much every single one of my basses because I just feel like these pickups are just the most versatile, well-rounded kind of humbucker pickup that's sort of styled after original jazz bass pickup. So I sort of got the inspiration from this bass from Ibanez basses and Warwick basses. So the main bass that I had played for most of my early music life was a Ibanez BTB. So a lot of the body dimensions, like the body width, which is basically 1.5 inches, to the neck width, the neck depth. So it's a little bit of a thicker neck, but it isn't quite as thick as some of the Warwick thumb basses are, which are like really like chunky kind of baseball bat thick. The string spacing is 18 millimeters, and I think the nut width is like 1.2 inches or something like that. It's nothing too huge, but I can't remember the exact measurement right now. So the electronics are kind of interesting because when I had that Ibanez, I pretty much only ever used my bridge pickup. You know, coming from people like Jocko or other fusion bass players that had that really kind of mid-rangey sort of punchy tone. Because of that, I felt like I didn't really need a neck pickup to be in there. But the downside of doing the bridge pickup is that it doesn't have as much low end as the neck pickup does, and for metal that can be a thing that can have a negative effect on the entire mix. So what I decided to do is I decided to have these 2 pickups here that are a little bit forward towards the fingerboard than just like a standard, you know, bridge spacing pickup would be, and they're run in series. So it's rather than it being 2 separate pickups, it's one pickup into the other pickup, which then creates this sort of really big, fat sounding kind of pickup. Like Dingwall has been doing that recently, and some of the influence for that did come from their Afterburner model. So when it's in series mode, only this volume pot works. So this one doesn't really do anything. This switch, when I flip it, then it'll go into parallel, and these pickups will act as 2 separate pickups. So then I can control them individually. And even though they are right next to each other, they do have a pretty distinct tone to them. So it's kind of, that was sort of a happy accident when I was designing that I really didn't think it was going to sound all that different, but they kind of do. And then this is just a simple 3-band EQ, just bass, mid, treble. Has a push-pull pot on the mid-range for controlling which part of the mid-frequency spectrum you're adjusting. And then each one of these volume pots has a coil tap that can individually coil tap one pickup or the other. It's 18 volts right there, 2 batteries. So this bass has a ton of headroom and can crank out a ton of volume. Hipshot tuners, Hipshot Transtone bridge. So most of the basses that I've built have all had Hipshot products because I just feel like they're really reliable, they're pretty easy to get, and they can take a beating. You know, like I've played hundreds of gigs on this bass now, and neither the tuners nor the bridge have, you know, faltered really at all. Only one truss rod, you know, because I feel like having 2 is a little bit overkill unless you have like a 7-string bass or anything bigger than that. So the strings that I usually use are DR fat beams that are 45 to 125. And they've been strings that I've always kind of come back to, that I've been playing them on and off for probably over 10 years now. Like they used to be Marcus Miller's signature bass string when he was still working with DR. and that's how I found out about them. But and I've tried a whole bunch of other different brands, but I always end up kind of coming back to these because they're stainless steel strings, so they have that kind of brightness and attack to them, but they also have this kind of bottom end and growl to them, which I feel like really works really well, especially for metal. But I mean, back home I play all sorts of different types of gigs, ranging from jazz gigs to country gigs to wedding gigs, so I have to be able to play all these different styles of music, and these strings work for all of them. So I feel like they're also not just a metal bass string. I guess one more thing about the body shape. I had always wanted a single cut, but I felt like most single cut models looked kind of clunky or just lopsided, and it always just never really felt right. So that kind of kept me from wanting to get a bass from another luthier, because I had this shape in mind, and I was like, all right, well, since I know how to do it, I kind of might as well do it. So this is my backup bass, which, other than the body shape and the wood choices, is pretty much exactly the same thing as my other one. So same string gauge, same electronics, really same, you know, configuration like that. As you can see, pretty much same hardware. These have Goto tuners on them, but not really much different. The tuning on both of these basses is standard 5-string tuning, nothing special, B, E, A, D, G. So this was, I think, the 4th or 5th one that I built, and one of the first double cut models that I built, that I felt like it would just be a good idea to have multiple different body shapes to be able to you know, present to people, because I have sold maybe 3 or 4 instruments so far. I don't have a huge desire to turn it into a big company or anything, but I guess we'll kind of see what happens with that. But so I wanted to have multiple body shapes that I could present to people. So the woods are slightly different. You can see Wenge again. The stringers on this, though, are Purple Heart, which is a really dense and heavy and bright wood, and I feel like that really brought out a lot of kind of nice clarity in the tone of this instrument. The body wood is Black Limba, which is a lighter wood than ash, so this bass is super, super light. This was actually the first time I did a walnut cap on the back of the peg head, so that was kind of fun because I had to sort of steam bend that into place to be able to make that look even and not lumpy. Walnut matching plates on that. But other than that, this is pretty much exactly the same thing. And I've had to use this bass once on this tour, but most of the time I'll just be using my main one. So this really is just kind of a backup, that just in case something happens on stage, I can switch to this pretty quickly. So, like I said in the earlier part of the video, we can't show you what I'm actually using on stage due to venue constraints, but this has been the head that I've been using on the tour, an Aguilar AG700. And this one's great because, like 700 states, it's a little bit louder, so I haven't really had to worry about, you know, not having enough headroom in some of these venues and some of the bigger ones that we've been playing. And this amp is great because it's modeled to be clean throughout the volume range of the head, that it's not meant to emulate tube breakup at all, which, I mean, is a good thing and can be a thing that some people want. But this head is super clean. It really, I mean, as you can see, the controls really aren't that complicated. It has an active passive pad, which I don't really use. I just keep it in passive mode, even though my bass has active electronics. And I keep the EQ pretty much flat. You know, as you can see, I turn the treble up a little bit, turn the high mids up a hair, and the low mids just down slightly to just kind of clear out some of the sort of unwanted bottom end frequencies in the low mid range spectrum. But other than that, I mean, it's got a bright switch and a deep switch, which actually really kind of push the volume a considerable amount when you push them in. So I have the bright switch in most of the time, but as you can see, there really isn't a whole lot to this head, and I think it speaks a lot to the greatness of Aguilar as a company, that I don't really have to do much to the controls on this to make it sound good, you know. So with my pedal board, I have a decent amount of pedals. I don't have as many as, you know, some people do, but most of it is kind of either distortion pedals or boost pedals. The radial tone bone is actually something that I just started using this tour as a means to send a super clean direct signal to the board, which can be a good thing if you have highly distorted or like really overly saturated tones. It can be good to have this along with it, because sometimes you can lose the, you know, fundamental pitch of what you're playing because it's so covered in distortion or chorus or delay or whatever. So this can help the bass to cut through the mix a little bit more, because you still have that like pure bass signal. So that has 2 channels on it. I only really ever use the one, and I use the one that doesn't have the EQ because I don't want to add more EQ to basically like 3 other EQ pedals I have in here. So instrument in, 1 signal straight out to the board, and that goes into my tuner, which, I mean, you don't really have to talk about that very much, into the dark glass supersymmetry compressor that I don't really overly compress my signal a lot, because I don't want it to squash any dynamics in my sound, or like I want to be able to control my levels with my hands more than anything. That's running into the Dark Glass Vintage Ultra, which is sort of the main tone shaping thing in my board. That I have most of the time the distortion on this. I have it on, you know, somewhere, as you can see, around like 1 o'clock, which is not super heavy, but you can definitely hear that grit in there. The B7K is more of an extra layer of high gain distortion that I'll add onto that for some of our really heavy parts, and it ends up not really being a huge volume boost, but it kind of just adds an extra layer of grit to it. And so this Earthquaker Devices pedal is actually, I've really come to liking using this a lot, because I do a decent amount of double thumping, or a type of, you know, kind of pseudo fingerstyle technique that has a, you know, like with slap bass, sometimes you can lose bottom end because it takes the shape of your notes from being something like this to being more like that, which can then end up causing you to get lost in the mix. So whenever I'm going to be doing any of my double thumping things, I turn this on, and what this is essentially a boost pedal that, as it's boosting, it starts boosting some of the higher frequencies, which can really add a really nice kind of clankiness to your sound that can further help you cut through the mix if you're playing with a technique that is a little bit lighter, or a technique that you can't dig in as hard as just regular fingerstyle. Volume pedal, you know, kind of self-explanatory. Then that goes into this TC Electronic chorus pedal that I have on all the time. That is another very integral part of my tone, and it adds this kind of depth to the sound that I'd really like, and almost in some ways kind of makes it sound a little bit like a fretless bass, which is kind of funny, because I've had a handful of people ask if I recorded any of the Exist albums with fretless bass, or that they think that I recorded it with fretless bass, but I've hardly ever played fretless and didn't record either of those albums with that. And I really think it comes from the use of the chorus, because it adds this sort of watery sort of sound that, along with any inflections that you add with your hands, can really kind of create this kind of loose and fluid sort of character to your tone. This is another chorus pedal that, much like the B7K, is kind of an extra added layer of something to, you know, extra layer of icing to add to the cake. That with where this is placed in the board, it also kind of acts like a boost pedal. So there are certain chordal sections in some of our tunes that this really helps the bass kind of cut through with that, while adding this also really kind of deep, kind of psychedelic nature and character to the sound. This is a reverb pedal, the Arena Reverb, that I actually on this tour I've only really been using in one of the segues in between some of our songs, because sometimes we'll do these sort of improvisational bits in between songs to kind of create this sort of overall cohesiveness with the set and kind of make things flow nicely from one tune to the other. And this at the very end is the Exotic Effects RC booster. This is just totally a clean boost. So for moments where I might have a lead, or one of the songs we're playing on this tour has a bass solo in it, so I will use that to kind of just help myself cut through and kind of get on top of everything. And I mean, we're working with our own sound guy on this tour, and he's great, but I like to kind of be able to control my own dynamics with either my pedals or with my hands as much as possible. So that's why I have almost essentially 3 boost pedals here, like this, and this. They all sort of act as boost pedals in various ways. Yeah, that's about it. So we will be releasing a record at some point this year, some point mid-time this year, and you can find any information about that on our Facebook page, on our Instagram page. We regularly update that, and especially once the rollout of that album starts happening, we'll definitely be posting about that a lot more. So we also have a Bandcamp page that you can buy either the CDs or any of our merch through. So we're pretty much on every form of social media. So.